This unit is on adaptations. An adaptation is just anything, any feature an organism has that allows it to survive and thrive in its environment. Whenever we're looking at adaptations, we can have structural or behavioral adaptations. Structural are physical features like the bill on a bird, the fur on a bear. It also includes internal structures like adapted lungs for the amount of oxygen available and things like that. Whenever we look at behavioral adaptations, we're looking at things that organisms do in order to better survive in their environment, such as birds migrating and bears hibernating. Whenever we're looking at adaptations, I want us to watch some videos discussing the different characteristics that we have. Now, since you're at home, you can always copy and paste this URL into your actual web browser and you'll be able to look at all of the videos. I want us just to look at a few personal ones that I think would be very good with our unit. The first one we're going to look at is hunt exhaustion.
Deciding whether to use hard-won energy reserves can be a matter of life and death. The arrival of a red fox means it's decision time. Up here the air is so starved of oxygen that a sustained chase is impossible. The fox has to try and take its prey by surprise. Not easy in this open country. The viscachas are rarely more than a short dash from safety. Viscachas have thin muscle walls to their lungs so they can breathe more freely at high altitude. But a rapid escape is exhausting, even for them. The panic's over for now. It's time for everyone to catch their breath. On the Altiplano, the air is in such short supply that neither hunter nor hunted can afford to waste it.
Now, whenever we saw that video, we were able to see structural and behavioral adaptations. The first structural adaptation you should have noticed was the actual camouflage of the fox. He was camouflaged, and that means that they are physically able to better blend in with their surroundings. Another structural adaptation you saw was the camouflage of the rabbit. It was able to actually blend in with the rocks individually. The third structural adaptation we have in this video is the actual development of lung walls. Usually lungs have very thick muscular walls in order to force a person to breathe. Now, if you live in high altitudes, if you remember from our weather unit, the higher in altitude you go, which means the higher up you go, the less oxygen you actually have due to lower air pressure. So animals and organisms that actually live in higher altitudes have adapted lungs in order to be able to breathe a lot freer. They have very thin lung muscle walls. That way they are able to move around quickly and breathe. In high altitude locations like this, moving fast like you saw the rabbit move could be a question of life or death. Do they run away really fast and chance running out of oxygen? Or do they stay there and chance being eaten? So it's kind of one of those you have to think about which one is better. And at this point, since they have the adapted lungs, they are capable of running away a lot faster. Now you also notice a behavioral adaptation with the fox. The fox did not chase. He had to make sure he had his energy reserved so he could breathe because his lungs were not as adapted as the rabbit's were.
The Himalayas are made of range upon range of mountains, building high. The air becomes dangerously thin. Bar-headed geese are the highest flying birds in the world. The higher they go, the faster the jet stream. A 100-mile-an-hour tailwind catapults them over the Himalayas. Bar-headed geese fly higher than Everest. Their blood is different, with special hemoglobin, and they can breathe faster and deeper, many gulps for each wing beat. They suffer severe hypoxia, way beyond any human athlete, pushing the boundaries of pain.
So in this one, they were investigating birds. Now these birds have the structural adaptation of their wings, which enables them to fly. They also have a very unique behavioral adaptation using the jet stream, which is a wind pattern of the earth, in order to help propel them faster across the earth. The higher they're able to go, the faster they move due to this jet stream. So that means they're able to travel a lot quicker than most other birds just by utilizing a naturally made wind pattern. But in doing this, they also have to be able to push the limits of pain, because the higher they go, the less oxygen they have available to them. And so it will actually tire them out and hurt them some, because they're losing oxygen as they move. This is a behavioral and a structural adaptation to be able to tolerate pain. Now, whenever we're looking at this, animals can be altitude tolerant, they can be cold tolerant, dry tolerant, fire tolerant, they can be more tolerant to heat. It just all depends upon what that animal has mutated and adapted to be able to survive with in their environment.
If you wanted to pick a creature to symbolize the frozen wastes of the Antarctic, I guess you might well choose a creature like this. These are macaroni penguins, and I'm on the island of South Georgia, halfway between the southern end of South America and the Antarctic. But in fact, it seems that the original penguins evolved not so much in cold climates as in relatively warm ones. And even today, there are species of penguins that live on the equator, in the Galapagos Islands. So this dense coat of insulating feathers with a layer of fat beneath it was probably originally developed simply to keep them warm in the seas anywhere. But it serves them just as well in the freezing Antarctic winds, standing on land, or on a surging iceberg. And they are superb swimmers. Not only are they swift and agile through the water, but when they come into land through breakers that would smash any boat, they seem to have the resilience of rubber balls. These chin-strap penguins are only a couple of feet high. King penguins are half as tall again. Large size can be an advantage in cold climates. The bigger a body, the smaller the surface area of its skin in proportion to its volume. so a big penguin retains its heat better than a smaller one. But their great size causes considerable problems in breeding. They lay just one egg, which they keep off the frozen ground by the ingenious, if rather inconvenient method of holding it on the top of their feet, covered by a fold of feathered skin. They keep it here for 8 long weeks. When it does at last hatch, the chick takes so long to grow to its full size and independence that they have to feed it for a further 10 months.
Now on this one towards the end, it showed a structural and behavioral adaptation coinciding, working together. The king penguins had the structural adaptation of an extra flap around the bottom part of the belly to help keep the eggs warm. And the behavior was actually holding the egg on top of the feet underneath that extra flap in order to incubate their babies.
The great mountains of South America, like Cotopaxi, 19,000 feet high, are very different. These volcanoes, some active, some dormant, are not isolated peaks, but part of a continuous range that runs the whole length of the continent and is surrounded by the high, cold plains of the Altiplano. So their flanks support a large and varied population of animals, all adapted to life at high altitudes and low temperatures. Here lives a wild South American camel, the vicuña. Its coat is fine and silky and protects it so effectively from the cold that it has paradoxically led to its near extinction. Men have recognized that vicuña wool has an unexcelled softness and warmth and hunted the animal for it until it's close to extinction. The people of the Andes have domesticated another wild camel, the guanaco, to produce heavy fleeced versions which not only produce excellent wool, but serve as beasts of burden. Here in Ecuador and Peru, close to the equator, wild camels live at around 14,000 feet. But as you travel south, down the range of the Andes, the snow line gets lower. Halfway down, 2,000 miles south of Cotopaxi, the line of permanent snow has dropped from 16,000 feet to 13,000 feet. 1,000 miles farther south still, the mountains are not nearly so high, but they're almost completely covered with snow, which comes down to within a few hundred feet of the sea. So, on the southernmost tip of South America, in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, the guanaco doesn't live at great altitudes, but almost at sea level. Yet it needs its warm coat just as much, for here, even in summer, it's very cold, and during the winter the whole land is snowbound. The reason that it gets colder as we get closer to the pole is not complicated. Rays from the sun strike the Earth at the equator at right angles, but as you travel round the curve of the Earth, the rays become more and more glancing. So a given amount of heat falling on the equator is distributed over a very much greater area in the polar regions, and has to travel through more of the Earth's atmosphere, which weakens it still further. So down in Patagonia, the sun's rays are very much less intense and carry much less heat, and the glaciers flow right down to the sea.
Now in this video, and you can even see it on this image right now, there's a structural adaptation of their neck. These are very tall, long-legged animals. So therefore, in order to be able to eat, since they are herbivores, they have adapted extremely long necks to enable them to bend down and eat without having to go and actually sit down. since they do live where they live, there's not many trees for them to reach up or bushes for them to eat directly off of, so they have adapted the accentuated neck to allow them to eat off of the ground as they move throughout the area. Now, some adaptations are with plants. Plants have adapted and evolved just as much as we have.
These are called locally mountain ash, but they're no relation of the European ash. In fact, they're eucalypts, and they stand over 300 feet tall. They carry their tiny seeds in small capsules and shed them a few at a time throughout the year. But in the deep shade, the seeds stand no chance. Even if they had landed on the fallen trunk of one of the adults, they would not have been high enough above the ground to be clear of the tree ferns. The fact is that in mature forests like this, the mountain ash has a severe problem of regeneration. The solution could not be more dramatic. It's another of those events that for human beings are major catastrophes. A forest fire. Oil in the bark and leaves of eucalyptus make them extremely inflammable. As the flames leap higher, the seed capsules up in the crowns are singed and they shed their contents. The fire grows in strength and becomes a firestorm. In the wake of such a huge burn, little is left alive. But safe in the soil, below the worst of the heat, many of the eucalyptus seeds have survived. In the sunshine, they sprout with extraordinary speed. Few, if any, of their competitors can match them. Nourished by the rich dressing of ash, they grow around the charred logs as thick and as uniform as a crop of wheat. Within a year or so, they're so tall that no other competitors are able to invade their land. This stump was burning exactly 10 years ago, and these saplings around me sprouted from seeds that germinated immediately after that fire. The saplings are growing so close together that their roots interlock, forming a dense mat into which few other tree seedlings can get a roothold. This land still belongs to the mountain ash.
So now on this one you saw a plant adaptation in which the plant actually built a capsule for its seeds. This benefits the plant because if their seeds are encapsulated, then they can protect them and no animals will come in and eat the seeds. So when there is a forest fire, they are still able to shed seeds by themselves without worrying about birds picking them off, so they will still be able to actually grow and develop more trees later on. Of course, some of these videos do not play that well. I was hoping I get to show you one more about a plant. Let's look at this one, see if it'll play.
It's now approaching noon, the hottest time of the day. It's summer, the hottest time of the year, and I'm in one of the hottest places on Earth, Death Valley in the western United States. A thermometer on the ground here has risen to 201 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 94 degrees centigrade. It's so hot that no creature can survive permanently out here. Even at the edge of these sand flats, where the ground is a little more broken, there is no sign of animal life whatever. All animals now have sought the shade and shelter from this ferocious sun. But there are some organisms that can't get out of the sun. Plants, being fixed to the ground, have to stay out in the heat of the day and simply endure. But all of them have special devices to help them to do so. The desert holly, its leaves grow at about 70 degrees to the vertical, so that in the morning, when it's less hot, and in the evening, and the plant needs light, it presents the face of its leaves to the light, but during the middle of the day, it shows only the edges, and so it doesn't heat up so much. Not only that, but the plant extracts salt from the salt-laden ground and excretes it as a white coating on the surface of the leaf, which, like the white costume of an athlete, reflects the heat and so keeps the plant that much cooler. And this, the creosote bush, this is one of the most widespread of plants in American deserts, and its roots are better at extracting the last molecule of water from these parched sands than those of any other American plant. And this has led to a most extraordinary state of affairs that's only just been discovered. It seems that the creosote bush was the first plant to establish itself in the arid sand of the Mojave Desert when the desert first appeared. And once it had established its extensive root system, it extracted moisture from the sand so efficiently that it was extremely difficult for any other plant to grow alongside it. And that applied not only to any other kind of plant, but also to its own seedlings. So an individual creosote bush tended to spread not by setting seeds and producing a new generation, but by sending out new stems around its base. And as these spread outwards, so the stems in the middle tended to die away, and the bush grew into a ring shape like this. So these are not separate individual creosote bushes as it might appear, but this is just one big ring-shaped individual plant. Over the centuries, the rings widened, changed their shape, until now some are over 25 yards across, like this one. Of course, the individual stems and leaves of this plant are not very ancient. The first ones to grow that appeared in the middle have decayed and disappeared a long time ago. But now it's estimated that this plant started growing between 10 and 12,000 years ago. In fact, when the Mojave Desert first appeared. And that makes it the oldest known living organism in the world.
Now with this one, the plants had several adaptations. One of the adaptations was the ability to bloom first thing in the morning with the leaves and flowers in order to undergo the processes of photosynthesis and respiration, which enable that plant to live. The second one was that once it got to a certain time of the day, the plant sensed the heat and was able to curl its leaves under and expose a white salty layer, which since white reflects sunlight, it enabled the plant to not shrivel up and die of too much heat, to be dried out. The third adaptation was on a different plant. This plant has adapted the ability to maneuver around the complications of reproducing in a desert. Instead of reproducing through seeds and things like that, because of the lack of water and overexposure of heat, the plant has omitted the production of seeds almost altogether and just grows through additional branches branching out from the underside, and that was the one that he was talking about making the ring. Now whenever we look at all of this information, we're looking at how these different adaptations can benefit or hurt. Now some animal adaptations are beneficial, Some animal adaptations are not beneficial. It just depends. Whenever we look at adaptations, we've got to understand that everything about a particular animal at this point is for a reason. There isn't really anything that animals have, especially us too, anything that they have that hasn't evolved there for a particular reason. They benefit it somehow.
What's it take to make the
The
A-list?
beak that's as sharp as the Swiss Army knife.
Horrible pink flesh with dots and weird hairs.
A loud mouth.
That's right, you gotta be an animal.
You understand?
Welcome to the A-list, a brand new series. This week we'll count down top animal dads.
Shut up! You'll get nothing. You'll eat this worm and you'll like it.
And the greatest survivors.
We can't see it. How are we gonna kill it?
The A-list, Friday at 9, only on Animal Planet.
I got it. An animal that really seems like a cheapskate to me is the elephant. I mean, look how big the elephant is. And all it eats is like bamboo and grass. I mean, when you're that big, you can afford to, go and catch some meat. Cheapskate.
It's very hard to take an animal on a vacation because, they all can get annoying after a while. You take a giraffe, they're always going, my neck hurts. There's no room on this plane. My neck is really killing me. And an elephant is there like, the seats are tight and my nose gets stuffed up in this altitude. I really can't take it. And mice are going, I fall through the seat. What good is this? Put a board down there or something. They have cheese. Stewardess, do you have any cheese here? And so animals are very annoying to take on vacation.
Which animal would I most like to be stranded on a desert island with? A camel, I guess, right? Because you get thirsty and you just jump off it, bust a straw into one of its humps, and just go to town. It works like that, right? I'm pretty sure they each have like a little aluminum foil area where you can just, it doesn't hurt them.
It's really difficult for me which animal I'd want to marry. I think I'd want to marry a dog because I love my dog so much, but Humphrey, the bull elephant seal, is kind of giving the dog a run for the money. But that might be a pity marry. I have to think about that one.
Which animal would I take to the prom? Oh, that's an easy one. I would take the seahorse. Well, he's got rhythm. That's for sure. He's a good dancer. I mean, he's no Antonio Banderas, but he's got moves.
I gotta go with the monkey on this. You ever met a really bad teenager? A really bad teenage kid who you can pretty much be confident he's gonna break your window and steal your stereo back when such things were possible and your stereo wasn't this big? That's what monkeys are like. It's like a monkey moved in next door, just say goodbye to your stereo. They're criminals, the little things. They're criminals, I'm telling you.
If I'd ask an animal to marry me, I'm engaged to a guy that looks like a bear. He's kind of big and hairy, so I'd have to go with a bear because they're just so cute and protective and they can beat the crap out of anybody. And they'll love me. And they catch fish. I'm a huge fan of salmon. Salmon for dinner every night. Works for me. I like honey. The bear. Easy.
What's it take to make the
The
A-list?
beak that's as sharp as the Swiss Army knife.
Horrible pink flesh with dots and weird hairs.
A loud mouth.
That's right, you gotta be an animal.
You understand?
Welcome to the A-list, a brand new series. This week we'll count down the best animal lovers
It's Lizard Girls Gone Wild.
and the biggest loudmouths. The A-list, all new, Friday at 9, only on Animal Planet.
Yes.
Which animal would I vote for president? I'd have to say the emperor penguin. That's right. Congress is already full of bird brain ideas as the rest of the government, so why not get a professional?
Which animal would I most like to be stranded on a desert island with? A camel, I guess, right? Because you get thirsty and you just jump off it, bust a straw into one of its humps, and just go to town. It works like that, right? I'm pretty sure they each have like a little aluminum foil area where you can just, doesn't hurt them.
Right, so whenever we're looking at animal adaptations, take into consideration all of the things that they said were beneficial about animals. All of those things are adaptation. The camel's hump, the bear's fur, the way that bears hunt, eating salmon, that's a behavior deal. They also use structural adaptations like their claws and all of that to catch the fish. Whenever we're looking at plant adaptations, plants around here will have little pricklies along the leaf. A lot of them have that for protection of their leaf. Leaves are the key vital part to plants, bushes, things like that living. They need the green color because the green is showing that they have chlorophyll and chloroplast, which undergo photosynthesis. If they undergo photosynthesis, that means they are actually making glucose, which is food. They then take that glucose and through cellular respiration make ATP, which is their chemical energy produced. That's the glucose and the energy, the ATP, is what we look for when we actually do consume plants. Now, lilies are really cool. If you ever look at the underside of a lily on water, it's red and gooey, but the top side is bright green. That's because the top side is the only side of the lily that's actually facing the sun. Therefore, it's the side that contains the chlorophyll and chloroplast. Another adaptation plants have is, especially like with flowers and things like that, they will grow to whichever direction the sun is pointing. So they may point to the left right now, but when the sun moves, they'll slowly follow it and shift as you go through. Whenever we look at the desert has very unique adaptations, especially with their cacti. Certain cacti have spines rather than leaves instead of leaves like a plant like we think of. And it stores water in its stem. So since it has a mass storage of water inside of the cacti, they actually will have these spines to help protect their water storage. Some of them will have little white hairs, little fuzzy parts on top of spines. This will help protect the plant from an animal trying to eat it or get its water. And then the white fuzzy hair-like structures help shade the plant because remember, white reflects sunlight. Some plants have a wax coating. Even some of our leaves that we see around here have wax coatings. This enables the plant to help protect itself against the heat. It also helps protect itself when it comes to insects and things like that. Let's look at some of our areas. Now in our area, a lot of leaves are very broad and wide like this. The wider the leaf, the more they will be able to undergo photosynthesis. So if they're very widespread like this, they can capture sunlight a lot better than plants like pine needles and stuff like that. The tree bark itself is to help protect the tree from colder winters, because in our areas we have pretty cold winters and extremely hot summers. The bark on the tree is also there to help protect the tree from any damage from other animals. When, say, a deer comes up to mark its territory, it'll scrape its antlers on the bark. So the tree will have a development of bark and it looks like it's just peeling away, but it's really not. It's there to help protect the inner layers because that's the living layer of the tree. On that note, that is a behavioral adaptation for deer as well. Again, you can go to this website right here if you want to look at more adaptations and see if you can find out more things about different organisms, different plants, for how they survive. Now, whenever we're looking at animal camouflage, this is the kind of fun one. In this picture, there is one organism. You can see it right here. But you see how it's camouflaged in with the color of the rocks and matching all the different colors around it. That is a structural adaptation they have developed over time in order to be able to camouflage them into their surroundings so they aren't seen by predators as often. Insects need camouflage a little bit even more than what other animals do, because if you think about it, a lot of animals eat on insects and they prey on them. So whenever we look at insects, they're kind of the kings of camouflage. In this, you see there's a camo moth, which is located right here. And you see that the moth has developed the adaptations to make itself look like an actual leaf. The brimstone butterfly. This one's not so hard to see. It's right here. But if you look, you can actually see on the butterfly, it looks just like the development and structures and veins of a leaf. The crescent moth. The crescent moth has adapted its colors in order to actually look at and look like its surroundings. The flower mantid, this bug has been able to develop and adapt to the color of the flower that it feeds off of and lives on. It's right there. Now this moth is really pretty cool. If you look at its wings, it looks like they're textured, just like the bark of a tree is. But they're really not. They're just like regular moth wings. However, with this one, due to the coloration, it's just like painting. They painted the texture on to their wings with their DNA through natural adaptations. Now this is a normal grasshopper. It's not one that we usually see around here, because if that grasshopper lived here, through natural selection, it would be weeded out because its characteristics are not favorable to our green environment. Therefore, we have green grasshoppers here because that's what is actually favored through natural selection. Whereas in this environment, if there were a green grasshopper sitting right next to it, the green grasshopper would not be favorable to this environment because everything in this environment is white and brown. This is a katydid. This is an organism that's really cool. It is actually adapted to make its tail look almost like a little baby leaf, and all of its colors are different, which match that types of leaves that it lives on. We have a lichen moth. And this one, if you look at it, it looks like there is just almost a tumor on that tree. Just an overgrowth or a spot on the tree that's naturally there. However, it's actually a moth. Now this is the adaptations that we're looking at to present with your My Fantastic Creature project. You will take one regular organism, and through a problem, through a catastrophe, it has to develop something it normally wouldn't have in order to survive. Whenever we look at adaptations all are beneficial through ecosystems. An ecosystem is the living resources, habitats, and residents of an area. This includes things like plants, animals, water, soil, and even microorganisms, which are micro, so they're very small. An ecosystem can be broken down into different habitats and different communities. So over here we have one water plant community, we have one tree community, we have another tree community, we have a water animal community, we have soil organism communities, all of these different communities. Now whenever you look at this, different communities will work together to give you a particular habitat. This would be one habitat. This could be one habitat. Habitats combine to give you the overall ecosystem. Ecosystems include how much sun is given to the trees, which enables the plants to grow so the little rabbits and other herbivores can eat on those plants. And it also includes how much the fish are able to feed off of the water plants due to the solar radiation to the water plants. The more fish, the more birds will survive that eat the fish, and it all coincides together. If one thing is deficient, it hurts all of the other organisms in an ecosystem. Whenever we look at ecosystems, every organism within it plays a particular role. They can be classified as either 1, a producer, 2, a consumer, or 3, a decomposer. The way energy actually gets moved to the ecosystem is when one organism physically eats the other. Now, if you look at this picture, you've got to make sure you understand that arrows in food chains and food webs point in the direction that energy actually moves, which means energy is moving from this bird into the fox, which in turn means the fox eats the bird. Whenever you're looking at an energy pyramid, this shows the amount of energy that is in each level, how much of energy each level has. So the first level that we have are producers, then we have our consumers. Our consumers can be broken down into primary consumers, which are herbivores, secondary consumers, which are carnivores, tertiary consumers, which are again a form of carnivores. The majority of the energy is at this level due to the fact that they are able to make their own food. They're the only organisms that can make their own food, are producers. They produce their food. Everything else has to eat in order to gain any form of food or energy. So again, the most energy is available at the producer level. Why? Now, as they go through, every organism actually uses some of the energy it gains from eating for its own life processes. This is 90% that it actually uses. However, 10% is stored and able to be passed on. For example, these producers have 10,000 kilocalories. That means this plant uses 90% of it to live, and 10% can be passed on. Which means when the grasshopper eats the grass, it is only gaining 1,000 kilocalories. Again, this grasshopper uses 90% and is only able to pass on 10% when the bird eats the grasshopper, and so forth. Therefore, if you are an owl and you eat nothing but meat, you really do not gain that much energy from your food, so you have to consistently eat. Whereas if you're a grasshopper, you're able to get more energy from the plants, which actually allows for the elephants to be so large, because what they do eat, they get so much energy from it that they're able to house and store and grow so large. When we look at an energy pyramid, which is this right here, when we look at an energy pyramid, we have the 10% that is actually stored to be transferred, and then most of that energy, that 90%, is converted to heat, which is through life processes. So again, let's look at this one. We start off with 1,000 kilocalories, 10% gets transferred to give you 100, 10% gets transferred to give you 10, and then finally, once the owl eats the snake, only 10% of 10 gets transferred to give you only 1 kilocalorie. So let's do some math. If mice ate all the plants, how much energy would be available to them as first level consumers? So if mice ate all the plants, the producers right now have 330,000 kilocalories. So remember, 90% they keep, 10% they are able to pass. So that means they would have available to them only about 3,300 kilocalories. If all the mice were eaten by the snakes, how much energy would be available to the snakes? So again, the mice are going to use 90% of this 33,000 kilocalories, which means 10% is able to be passed on. So at this point, the snake is only consuming 3,300 kilocalories, which means when the owl eats the snake, it is only getting 330 kilocalories. If all the snakes were eaten by the owl, how much would the owl receive? And there you go. About how much energy would the owl use for its life processes or loses heat? So anytime that you see life processes or loses heat, remember that's 90%. So get your calculator. What is 90% of 330 times 0.9? This gives me 297 that the owl uses himself. So that's what he has to have to actually live every day. How much energy would be stored? Anytime that we talk about stored, we're looking at 10%. So we again, 330 times 0.1 equals 33 to be transferred to anything that eats the owl. Now, whenever we're looking at energy entering an ecosystem, it actually enters first through sunlight and is converted into food by producers. The energy is then, through food, transferred to organisms which eat the producers, and then to other organisms which feed on those primary consumers. The way that we show this is in a food chain. A food chain shows only one possible path along which energy can move in an ecosystem. Whenever we have food chains, we draw our arrows in particular ways. The arrow will always show the direction the energy is moving, and only that, the direction of energy flow. So that means energy is going from the producer to this mouse, which means the mouse is eating the producer. Energy is going from the mouse to the snake, which means the snake is eating the mouse. And from the snake to the bird, which means the bird is eating the snake. Now, whenever we have a food web is many overlapping food chains. Food webs can be easily broken into individual food chains. All you have to do is follow one of the paths, and it really doesn't even matter which one you follow. You still get to one food chain. And now you notice every time I do this, I'm stopping at the raven. The way that you look at food chains is that, say we look at the deer right here. This deer has only one arrow pointing to it, which means this deer only consumes plants. However, on the other side of this deer has two arrows leaving it, which means two things feed off of the deer. So whenever you look, you actually have three top organisms here. You have your producers down here. They won't always be at the bottom, but they usually will start and always will start the food chain or food web. They could be at the top and you just have the arrows pointing down. It just depends upon which one you actually look at. So let's look. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now you notice on this one I went over one of the laps, and that's okay. You can go over. It still ends up being a different food chain because you are ending up with a different organism at the very end for the top predator. And so forth. Every organism, like we said, has a role. They're either a decomposer, a producer, or a consumer. So the decomposers consume or decompose dead plants and animals. Decomposers are fungi and bacteria. Producers, they're always the first in a food chain. They are the base of the energy pyramid, and they make their own food. Herbivores, these are first level consumers. They are a consumer because they eat. However, they only eat plants, which are your producers. You'll hear this called a first level consumer or a primary consumer. And then we also have omnivores. These are second level consumers. We call these secondary consumers. They can eat consumers and producers. We are omnivores. And then finally we have our top predators, which are the carnivores. These are your third level consumers, also called tertiary. These eat usually just meat, so they eat the second level consumers. Now looking at this, we have a few questions to go over. First of all, let's just look at what organisms we have. We have only one top predator here. This one top predator is the red fox. If you look right here, all the arrows are pointing to the red fox, yet no arrows are leaving the red fox, which means in this particular food web, nothing is eating or trying to consume the red fox. So whenever we go through this, your first question is that, what are the decomposers that they are showing here? The decomposer is the mushroom. And then you have a question about why is it not connected to any other organism by an arrow? The reason decomposers are not connected to other organisms through arrows is because they do not actually take the energy or give energy. What they do is they decompose, they help break things down and just give off nutrients to the organisms, to producers, to enable producers to grow a lot faster and a lot healthier because they're giving back nutrients that they need in order to grow. The producers that we have are the plants, the consumers which actually feed on the producers. Let me show you how to find this. When you're asked about what actually feeds on another organism, you find that organism. So my organism is right here. And you look at how many arrows are leaving that organism and where they go to. So whenever we do this, we see 1, 2, 3, 4. So we actually have 4 organisms which feed on the producers. That's the snail, the grasshopper, the crayfish, and the red fox. Your third level consumer here is the red fox. Whenever we talk about levels of consumers, you need to understand the producers are not consumers. So our first level consumers actually are right here. Our second starts right here. And then our third is up here. We still have 4 levels if you think in terms of an energy pyramid, but that question was asking about actual consumers. So the third level consumer that we have is the red fox. The main energy sources for the red fox, the way that you do this one is kind of backwards from finding what feeds on an organism. You find your red fox, and then you just look at all the things pointing to the red fox. That will show you what all it eats, so what all the energy sources it has. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that means the red fox actually consumes energy and gets energy from the shrew, the heron, plants, grasshoppers, crayfish, and frogs. At this point, this third level consumer is an omnivore because it eats plants and animals. So then there's a question. It says, suppose the snail population is infected by a deadly parasite and the entire snail population dies out. Which organism would be directly affected and which ones would be indirectly affected? So direct will be in red, indirect will be in green. So direct effects. Anything that is directly affected is directly connected to the organism which is being hurt. So direct, 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 and direct. That's a direct effect. Indirect effect are the ones that are hurt due to something else but are not actually connected to the organism being eliminated. For example, you have to the red fox, you have the frog because of the heron, you have the the grasshopper, because of the shrew. Those are the organisms that are indirectly affected. So what happens here is if the snail population goes away, and let's say it's diminishing, it's going away, that means the shrew will actually lose a food source. So it will add what we call feeding pressure to the grasshopper. The shrew losing a food source could make it diminish some. That's a direct effect. This is an indirect effect, making the grasshopper population possibly decline. So, direct, indirect. Another indirect effect could be the red fox. If the shrew population does diminish due to the absence of a food source, then the red fox again will lose a food source and will have to add feeding pressure to the other organisms they eat, which will then in turn cause them to slowly diminish down. Now, there's usually not more than 4 levels in a food chain. This is because by the time you get up to the very top, remember every time you go up a level, it's only 10%. So by the time you get up to the top, there's so little energy left that if anything were to eat the red fox, they wouldn't get enough energy from the red fox. Therefore, they don't try to prey on it. They go and try to prey on other organisms, making them a third level consumer themselves. This is how complicated some food webs can be. This just shows you all the different things. If you look, first of all, at the krill has only 2 things that it actually eats, while all the rest of these are organisms that eat the krill themselves. Now you can see food webs with pictures, or you can see them with just words. Producers also can be located anywhere in any direction. So you've got to make sure you understand that producers are plants. So here, my producers are actually up here. Here are my producers. Here are the organisms that eat producers only. And here are organisms that eat either meat, so they're carnivores, or they eat both, so they're omnivores. So this would be my first level consumer and my second level consumer, and here are my producers. Now we're going to complete an oh dear activity later on in class, so I do not want to give away too much there. And these will be the questions that we answer according to the activity that we complete. It will be counted as a lab. This is the chart that we will be completing in class as well.